예, 예정된 시간이 조금 지체됐네요.
So it's time that we should have started.
그럼 지금부터
So we're going to start
네트워크 서울대
session 33, Literature in Basic Income, the Heart of Poetry and the Heart of Basic Income.
그렇습니다. 저 또 나왔습니다.
So, right, I'm here again.
문학과 기본소득, 시의 마음과 기본소득의 마음의 진행을 맡은
The moderator of the session
한국 네트워크 운영위원이자
and steering committee member of the BI Kyung and Ryoo literary critic. Nice to meet you.
먼저 기본소득 운동사에 있어서 큰 전환점이
So, first of all, it's a great honor once again to be moderating a session
한국 문학을 이끌어가는 대단한
in this Congress, which is going to be a transformative opportunity in the history of basic income movement. Especially more pleasant because I'm here with my colleagues in the literary community, and one of them is actually joining us online, which was unexpected.
기본소득 운동의
Sometimes people ask me about how I got involved in the BI movement.
치레로 하는 질문들이어서
Most of them don't mean anything serious, so I just answer those questions like, it just happened. But sometimes I don't understand what happened to myself. I used to spend all my time reading novels because I love it.
하던 것에 그치지 않고
And then somehow I was fascinated by the idea of basic income. And even further, cannot spend any time reading novels because I have to preach the necessity of basic income. So somebody might say that I just followed a friend of mine, or I was convinced by a junior member of the literary community. But there was clearly a choice based on history and philosophy. And as I was preparing for this session, I had a very clear understanding of how it happened.
마음을 지니고 있구나 하는 것.
Looking at the title, I understood that literature and basic income have the same heart. According to the words of Jacques Langsier, I believe basic income is the most optimum institution
엎드려 우는 사람의 이야기를
in order to give back
한 가지를 덧붙이자면
the shares to those who do not deserve. According to the words of Ms. Kim Hae-ja, the first speaker, it's about writing down the stories of people crying while their knees are down on the ground.
아닌가 합니다. 기본소득은
So if basic income has heart, I believe this is exactly what that is. Basic income is the best system to ensure the shares for the people who don't deserve and unconsciously transform ourselves to care about other people in a permanent way.
문학이기도 했습니다.
Therefore, to me, basic income is literature outside of literature. Maybe because of the similarity or affinity between literature and basic income, I assume that many people in the literary community are favorable towards basic income. In fact, there have been many members of literary community who have been earlier than myself in preaching the necessity of basic income. They are the panelists in this session. We have Ms. Kim Hae-ja, who was supposed to be here beside me, but she's joining us, trying to join us online. She said she is doing some farming work because she forgot that she has to be here. Right, so after Ms. Kim, we have Mr. Lee Moon-jae. And on my right, we have Mr. Ms. Hwang Siun, writer. On my left, we have Myong-ho, literary critic and English literature researcher.
일탈을
Yesterday when I was moderating a session, I said that the session will be more or less freestyle. Maybe the last speaker, Mr. Shin, heard of that. He is on his way.
사회과학적
So I believe that when basic income
언어로
is explained in the language of humanities, in emotion, not just the language of social science,
설레고 있는 원래 표현은
it will be
저는
realized earlier and
오늘 이 자리가
reach out to the hearts of people. So today I'm a little bit excited
할때 가질 수 있는
because I think this session will be a great opportunity to test the impact of the idea of basic income when it's combined with the language of humanities.
이문재 시인
So let me first invite Mr. Lee Moon-jae,
하겠습니다.
poet.
황금률과 선물의 집.
So the title of his presentation is titled The Golden Rule and the House of Gift. Please welcome him with a big hand.
시간이 제한이 되어 있어서
I'm given
준비한 원고를
a limited time, so I'm going to read
가장 잘
out the paper in a slow
제가 읽어드릴
manner.
제목은 황금률.
So the title of my paper is The Golden Rule and the House of Gift.
소제목은 왜 시가 아니고
And the title of part 1 is Why I'm not talking about poetry, but the heart of poetry.
60년대 중
We are all born
따르면
poets. According to a creativity research released in the 1960s in the United States, the creativity index
30점대로 떨어지고
is as high as 98 out of 100
가정과 학교
from you're born and under 5 years of age. However, when you reach 12 years of age, it drops to about 30, and after 20 years, it drops further down to 2.
몸에 새겨진 시적 감성.
So, the socialization process takes away the heart of poetry from us who are born poets.
문제는 개인의 유전자와
The problem here is that the socialization process and people's DNA have to exist in harmony and balance, but that is not true.
지구촌의 대중소비
The neoliberal globalization in the information technology transformed the global village into a society of mass consumption, which reduced individuals into consumers,
내가 느끼는 것
and that colonized the area of feelings and expression of us.
주지하다시피 나는
It is not purely felt or expressed by us.
하지만 그렇다고 해서 시의 마음이
Today, I am constructed by others. However, that doesn't mean that our poetic heart disappear immediately.
시를 읽거나
It's just that we forget about it or looking the other way.
나는 그렇지 않다고
Then, if we read and write poems, can we recover the poetic heart? I don't think so.
구체적인
Reading or writing poems is exceptional, and it cannot be performed by anyone. Today, poetry is distanced from the
문제를 고착시켰기 때문에
specific realities of our daily lives,
그릇된
partly because of the literary education.
문학 교실이라고 저는 생각합니다.
In our education system, poems were reduced to something where you have to find the one right answer. In other words, our classrooms are the court of trial for poetry.
황금률이죠.
So what does poetic heart mean? I believe at the center of that is the golden rule. Now, the golden rule has been preached over and over again in the form of religion throughout the human history.
이와 다르지 않습니다.
Be in other people's shoes.
애락을
As well known, Confucius, Mencius, and Jesus all emphasize this. I believe the imagination demanded by literature is exactly that. You need to have the capacity to understand the feelings of others. You have to expand yourself
과학 기술까지 타자에 포함됩니다.
outside of the boundaries of your skin. In that way, you have to meet the others and invite them to inside you. I believe this is poetic art. Here, the others doesn't necessarily mean people in front of you.
성숙.
It includes the humankind,
두 번째 챕터입니다.
all life beings,
기본소득.
even objects, machines, and scientific technology. This is how we can be mature beings as a member of the earth or even the universe.
하는 사회.
Now, part two is a society rooted in land and basic income.
이기도 했습니다.
Before the idea of basic income, there was a village. There was a community rooted in land. Everything was sought from the land. The land was a source of emotion, intelligence, and spirituality.
없지 않을 수 없습니다.
And in this kind of society, mutual assistance was what supported that.
가난한 삶의
In this society, everyone was poor equally. When they are equally poor, they have to help each other in order to survive. In this society, isolation was punishment.
주셨습니다. 우리가 익히 알고 있듯이
So, in other words, the community rooted in land was a world of fraternity and hospitality.
4세기 초
As we all know, this community collapsed rapidly with industrialization. In the West, the culture of hospitality was taken away by Christianity in the 4th century. And after the birth of modern nation states, the tradition of mutual assistance was reduced to social security programs. In the past, sharing was horizontal among the people. However, welfare or social security schemes are
지금 수행적
hierarchical, involving state.
부터 자기 삶의
In modern nation states, people were reduced to taxpayers or recipients of selective welfare schemes. When a state becomes the master, people who are the sovereign became slaves. It's not fair, it's not based on common sense, it's not transparent. This only cultivates a sense of frustration among the people.
국회도 마찬가지입니다.
I believe that state has to recover its poetic heart. In other words, it has to be in the shoes of the people. Now, what is a state? It's the totality of people's sovereignty. However, states objectify the people and use them as tools. The same is true for the National Assembly.
서지는 않을 것입니다.
Our politics in reality do not look forward into 5 years. There is no future in the politics of today. And when a state and the people share the same poetic heart, I believe the tradition of mutual assistance will be realized in the form of basic income. Of course, as it has always been, politics will not be the first to move. The sovereign people has to make the first move. When the people recover the poetic heart and express it, politics and state will become a sincere servant of the people. Therefore, I believe the path toward basic income is the path of poetry and the path of democracy. Part 3, basic income is the central pillar of civilizational transformation.
보장되는 세상.
The process of realizing basic income has to be in line with a transformation of civilization. Because in a world with basic income, the skies have to be blue and the rights to be lazy should be guaranteed. If the ecosystem is not
부각시키는 것은
if the ecosystem is destroyed, basic income will have no point.
자율, 자족,
If we allow basic income to be captured by the logics of the economy, we will betray the fundamental purpose of basic income. Basic income is the basic for human dignity, autonomy, sufficiency, and self-governing. If you are going to be a dignified agent of life, skies have to be blue and the earth has to be fertile. You cannot be dignified only with money. So the path of introducing basic income should be a process of recreating all relationships around us.
상대방의 처지를
In other words, you have to transform modern civilization into ecological transformation. Now, the poetic heart that feels the pain of others as ours can be also understood as the gifting heart.
그렇습니다. 내 삶 자체가
And
누군가에게 선물이 되고
sympathy and solidarity with other people can be gift for them. So, if your life is not a gift to others, your life is not successful. Borrowing the words of Ivan Illich.
인간과 천지자연이 조화와
So, your achievement or expression has to be gift to others, and others gift to us. This is a world I believe basic income should create.
잘 드러나 있습니다.
Let me quote a poem, The House of Gifts by Lee Chang-gi, which aptly expresses the virtue of mutual assistance. I believe if we realize basic income through democracy and based on basic income, realize ecological civilization, we'll be able to live in the house of gift, as I quote.
아무렴 그렇고 말고.
For a twin grandfather who is missing after suffering from dementia, here is a path that is familiar to him. That's right.
자식 잃고 먼 길 떠난 친구 부부에게 답장 붙은 편지 한 줄.
To Mr. Kim's 60th birthday party, who cannot read or write, here is a lot of land without books. That is right. For my friend's couple who went a long way after losing their children, here's a letter with replies. Yes, that's right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee Moon-jae. Well, I forgot to introduce Mr. Lee. He is a poet. He published a few poetry books, including When I Take Off My Wet Shoes and Show Them to Sun, the poems of Walk, The Remote Area of Heart, Imperial Hotel, and also a prose book titled Busy is Lazy. And actually, he wrote a poem on basic income itself. I'd like to ask him to read that out for the audience. I have it for you. Am I supposed to read it out? That will be simultaneously translated as well. Please welcome him.
이거는 그 개간 기본소득 창간호가
So this is a poem that I contributed to the quarterly journal Basic Income when it was first published. So it's titled Future
밑에 개간 기본소득
for the Future.
이렇게 되어 있습니다. 이 시간이
Do I have the time? Right, I'm going to be quick.
아이들과 눈이
It's hard to see eye to eye with children. It's been a while since I asked students about their future dream. It's been a while since I raised my voice saying that the youth should be angry. It's because I'm sorry. It's because I cannot pass down what I have inherited from my parents to my sons and daughters. There's nothing I can pass down to them, including the lifestyle and nature in their integrity. Looking back, what I've added were all that
탄생
since the birth of Homo sapiens, there hasn't been such a great discontinuation.
미래 세대의
The biggest reason is that the established generation has been taking away the future of our future generations. In the names of development, growth, and prosperity, we have been taking away the future from our
맞을
descendants.
것이다.
We have to admit honestly and give it back.
하지만 기름이 있다.
If fail to give future to future generations, we will end up in a catastrophe. We don't have enough time, but there is a way. One of the ways is basic income.
노인과 어린이도 살아난다.
Future will be recovered when the youth are free from economic fear. When the youth are revived, the seniors and children can be revived. This is the beginning. Basic income is a path not taken, and the way we have a long way to go. But the goal is clear. Moving beyond all differences and boundaries until the day when all humankind becomes recipients of basic income. Then that will be the creation of sustainable Anthropocene that all Homo sapiens and all life wants. Let us not miss the last opportunity. Basic income is the future we have to pass down to future generations.
감동적인 구절이 많았습니다.
Thank you very much. That was very touching. In particular, to me, the line, "We don't have much time." So now I'm going to move on to the next presentation. We don't have Ms. Kim Hae-ja yet online. Maybe we won't be able to have her in the session.
들어볼 수 있지 않을까.
Maybe only a poem from her as well, but we'll try.
두 번째 발표는
Moving on to Ms. Hwang Siun.
님은 소설가시고요.
She's
아,
a novelist.
어딘가에 소개되어 있는 구절대로 소개를 해드리겠습니다.
And if I can introduce her,
창비 장편 소설상을 받으며 날아 올랐으나
she won the Changbi Prize and she started to fly, but in the same spring she had a fall and her wings were broken. And from that accident, she's paralyzed from the waist down and she was left with pains. But she is living and proving that she is living,
소개글이
writing and reading slowly. So that was a quick introduction.
로 컴백홈 홈이 있었고요.
And one of the novels include Come Back Home. And last year there was this
자,
prose book called The Things That You Don't Know. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
저도 준비해온 원고를 읽는
I also prepared a script, so
하도록
I
하겠습니다.
think I'm going to read the script.
제목은 마음까지 어루만질
The title is Welfare That Can Touch the Heart.
경험했던 일을
I'm basically going to talk about my experience. It's sort of like an essay of my own
여기
story.
계시는 여러분들과는 달리
Unlike many of you in this room, I don't know much about a basic income. Last summer,
그래서 편에는
I wrote a short novel in the Basic Income Quarterly published by the Basic Income Korean Network.
알아보지는 못했습니다.
I was briefly interested in it, but I didn't get to look into the topic in depth.
알아보기 시작한
I was asked to participate in this congress recently and started to learn about a basic income. I still don't have the full knowledge. All I know is that a basic income is periodic cash payment, unconditionally delivered to all on an individual basis without means test or work requirement.
그런 충격을 느꼈.
When I first learned about this definition of a basic income, I was a bit shocked. It was because of the phrase without means test.
거치는 과정에서
Probably because I thought of the embarrassing situations I had to go through in the past and the sense of humiliation I had to feel because of a screening process.
마음이라는
It may be a little beside the topic of the mind of poetry and the mind of a basic income, but first let me tell you why I couldn't help but be shocked by the phrase without means test in the definition of a basic income.
류보선 선생님께서 소개해 주신 것처럼 저는 2011년
As Mr. Ryoo introduced, I had a fall in 2011 and that injured my spinal cord. I'm paralyzed from the waist down and it is complete paralysis. I'm not able to use the lower half of my body at all. And I suffer from neuropathic pain as a result.
제가 사고가 난 지 10년이
Even now, more than a decade after the accident, it's hard to maintain a normal life without narcotic painkillers.
약 기운을 빌어서
The time you can get back on track and maintain your normal physical conditions is extremely limited. Naturally, it became difficult for me to carry out various social activities. Many problems followed, but the biggest was the fact that the accident had left me terribly financially incompetent.
학생들이 가르치는 수학
Before the accident, I worked as a math instructor at a private institute for college exams. Like many other writers, my other job had nothing to do with writing. However, the accident prevented me from continuing my job.
그 일뿐만이 아니라 할 수 있는 일들이
It also put various limitations to what I could do.
사고 초기 지불해야 했던 수술비
With the help of my parents, I managed to pay the huge hospital bills, including the costs for surgery that I had at the beginning of the accident. But
수입 활동형
after that, my life began to decline quickly as I lost my job, and with all the other expenses that I never thought of before, such as regular hospital bills, expenses for medications, and various disability-related equipment.
수 없는 건강만 믿고
I regretted that I hadn't prepared for the future, but regret was useless, as is often the case.
해진 저는 국가에 지원할
Desperate,
수 있는 여러 방법을
I looked for ways to get support from the state.
기초생활 수급자가
First,
되어서 생계급여를
I tried to apply for a basic livelihood program and submitted documents several times, but I was rejected many times.
다음으로는 감당하기 벅찬
Next,
의료비를 지원받기
I was subject to various document reviews to get support for medical expenses that were too much to bear. Rejected again,
책임져야 할
because I had parents who were supposed to take care of me.
환갑이 넘었던 제
My father, who was over 60 years old at the time, was obliged to support his disabled daughter, a single woman approaching 40, because he owned a house in the metropolitan area and he paid a business income tax, owning a trailer and earning a certain level of income every month. All of a sudden, I became a dependent of my parents,
매달 지급되는
who were over 60 years old. The only support I could receive from the state was a small amount of monthly disability pension.
여전히 기초생활
My father passed away from cancer a few years ago, but I'm still neither a basic livelihood recipient nor a medical expense recipient. I'm still living in the house I inherited from my dad, and I'm asked to write as a writer once in the blue moon.
소득을 더 못하고 있기 때문입니다.
And I work 4 hours a day from home for people with disabilities to add a little extra income. In fact, I often feel that this is not enough, but the government seems to judge that I'm less poor to receive benefits for living and medical expenses.
모르겠지만
Maybe I'm thinking too simplistically, but I don't really understand what the prices of the house I'm living in, whether it goes up and down, has anything to do with me unless I rent it out and make rental incomes or sell it to cash it out.
또 받고 있으니 다행이라고.
Should I be glad to have a disability pension at least?
물론 그마저도 얼마 전
Anyway,
자고 대폭 삭감되었어요.
actually this was cut greatly after I was
장애연금을 받고
evaluated again. Anyway, I've been receiving disability benefits for several years now. And I've been receiving personal assistance service for the disabled.
지 않은 액수의 본인 부담.
For that, I have to pay a considerable amount of out-of-pocket expenses. Yet, in order to receive those two benefits, I have to prove over and over again how poor I am and how incapacitated I am because of my disability. In the case of the personal assistance service for the disabled people, it's necessary to prove constantly that you're not lying in using the service. For instance, you get unexpected visits and phone calls from the staff of the support center, and you must prove you're with an assistant on a video call.
이틀에 한 번씩 화장실
I can't defecate in the usual way, and every other day I have to do colonic irrigation in my bed instead of in the toilet, and I was baffled when the staff visited me during the process.
정부에서는 부정수급을
The government may have come up with this idea to prevent fraudulent receipt of services and to verify the eligibility to receive service vouchers, but as a person who has to undergo such verification unexpectedly and repeatedly, I often find myself in this difficult situation. not just difficult, but every time I find myself in such a situation, I actually feel ashamed and humiliated.
하는 것이 복지
I don't know if we can call it a welfare benefit if it makes people feel this way. Isn't there any other way that doesn't make recipients feel ashamed?
하고 과거 장애 등급 제시
Nonetheless, every time I have been re-evaluated for disability rating or personal assistance service,
해 보이기 위해
I did my best to look a little more incapacitated and poorer.
연극을 했습니다. 대단한 걸 얻기 위해서 그랬던 것은 아닙니다.
I didn't do it to get some more. I was simply concerned that the number of hours that's already not enough might be even more reduced.
지금보다 줄어들게 된다.
If the number of hours is reduced, it will be almost impossible to find an assistant.
서비스 시간이 줄어들면
If the service hours are cut, the salary they get will decrease,
그래서 목욕의 대변
and no one would be willing to bathe me and help me take a pee for that small pay. Then again, all the responsibility for care would fall on my mother's shoulder, who is left alone.
울컥울컥
I was afraid of that, and that is why I did my best to prove my poverty and incompetence every time, swallowing the shame.
적이지만 저로서는
It's humiliating, but for me, it was a choice for survival.
거짓말을 하고 있지 않다.
Proving my incompetence, poverty, and that I'm not lying, how I feel is not taken into account in the process.
행정도 사람이 하는 일을
Administrative work is also done by humans, and I wonder how I feel like I'm standing in front of a cold, solid wall every time.
모든 사람에게
Philosopher John Rawls put pride among the basic goods that should be distributed equally among all people and defined it as the most important basic good.
그로 인해 고통스러운
I think there are many other people who feel humiliated and tormented by proving their poverty and incompetence. That kind of pain can also leave a scar in a person's heart that is difficult to heal. If it doesn't instill self-esteem but humiliates people instead, can we really call it welfare?
은
As we all know, this selective income guarantee basically has the effect of stigmatizing applicants. The moment you apply, you'll be revealed to be low income. The stigma effect is so strong that some low-income people avoid applying even though they are eligible.
구제 신청을 하지 못.
It is not uncommon for elderly people living alone not to apply for fear of stigmatizing their children.
흐려지고 주눅이
I also remember having been quite hesitant applying for the benefits.
그런데 이렇게 어려운
Even if you do apply,
혜택을 받게 되어도
you have to keep proving your incompetence and poverty on a regular basis in order to maintain your entitlement.
일체의 자격 심사 없이
This is why the definition of a basic income, which is paid without any eligibility screening, came as a shock to me.
아주 불가능한
Speaking of which, welfare that can touch the hearts of people might not be impossible. Of course, some people might accuse me of complaining only with the state support I receive.
서비스를 제공받고 있다는 사실.
They might think I have to be only grateful,
그런데 어쩌면
but I think they're probably the most common public figure we're going to have to persuade.
그렇습니다. 아직 많은 대중들은
It seems that many members of the public have not embraced the concept without any eligibility screenings or without any requirement for work.
그런 의미에서
And in that sense, I think today's meeting is very meaningful.
시의 마음과 개인 소득
If we talk about where the heart of poetry meets the heart of personal income and how such a heart can reach people,
하다 보면 대중을
we will find room to persuade the public.
여러 선생님들이
I look forward to listening to your stories as well,
나눌 수 있는 시간이
and I will share my stories as well. Thank you.
됩니다.
예, 황교안 선생님의 발표였습니다.
Ms. Hwang, thank you very much for your talk.
기본소득의 중요한 요소 중에 하나가
Among the essential
없다는 것인데
elements, without means test
중요한 구절인지를
is a very important piece, and from your talk, we understand that how crucial
안에 보이기 위해 최선을 다하는
that plays. So, how you tried your best to look poor and incompetent, that shows the blind spot of the welfare system that we have and how we can overcome that challenge with the concept of a basic income. Well, it's a very personal story to tell and very hard story to tell. So thank you very much for the story.
김여자 선생님 나와 계시네요.
And we also have Ms. Kim Hae-ja joining us online. Good afternoon. You baffled me a lot. Thank you for putting me in the spot. Well, you look quite happy.
시간이 많지 않습니다.
We don't have much time.
네.
도 안에
You will be given 10 minutes.
맞춰주시면 고맙겠습니다. 발표창에 듣도록 하겠습니다.
Then the floor is yours. Please welcome her with a big round of applause.
제가 드릴 말씀은 좀 없고
So the talk,
신앙송 하나 해도
well, instead of just giving a speech, can I just read a poem?
들릴까요?
Do you hear me good?
예, 잘 들립니다.
Yes, we hear you.
제가 시골에 살다 보니까
I live in the countryside.
에 대한 생각이
So about a basic income, well, I feel the need myself that we have many elderly people in this part of this country.
가지고 서로 거기에
So for example, livelihood support, and they have
많은데도
different welfare schemes, and some of them are eligible. Some of them do not meet the criteria, and some people who are poorer are not eligible because of this written criteria. And with this small amount of money, sometimes they
이것은 어떤
have conflicts because some are eligible and some are not. So I believe that this is not just a slogan, but it's about touching people's hearts. And we have to pay attention to the hearts of people.
맑게 그리고 관계를
So it's about mending the hearts and making the relations
느끼고 있습니다.
warmer.
네, 신앙송 그런 느낌.
And let me read my poem with that in mind.
일하지 않는 자여,
Thou that does not work, do not eat.
일하지 않는 자여 먹지도 마라. 이 고는
This slogan is sick,
누구를 위해 일하는
not knowing who we work for.
자와 죽은 자로 갈라진
Labor divided into the living and the dead is a river that piles up corpses.
고용과 합체가 되어버린
Labor that has become a combination of employment is a dance of death.
해서는 안 될 일.
Those who have not done what you should not do, enjoy your meal.
그댄 뇌물과 청
You have neither the chair for bribes and solicitations, nor superiors or strings
도
to direct corruption and
만인에게
manipulation.
기본소득을 보장.
Guarantee a basic income for all.
아이나
The
늙은
child, the old, the rich,
이나
and the poor only get to live once.
하나의 위, 하나의
Equal right to survival for those who have one stomach and one heart.
적자는 거짓말이다.
Survival of the fittest is a lie. Even trees have intertwined roots that share water.
그 작은
Tiny cells that are hard to see send and receive nutrients through the membrane.
한국의 백수여
Be confident, those who are jobless. You're as resourceful as anyone can be, and provided a helping hand.
그의 손이
You
되었다.
fell to the ground and nourished life,
엎드려
covered by the morning dew, singing the setting moon.
덮고 자는
You
달을 노래하고
observed the cogs
바퀴 바깥
outside the cogwheel,
관찰했다. 그대는 밤새
staying awake all night alone.
지도를 그리고
You drew a new map of humanity
눈으로 계산할
and shed tears for the sick. And these tears cannot be calculated into money.
만인에게 돌려
Give back to all what is of all.
가난과 사랑과
How can you measure poverty, love, solitude, and freedom?
있으랴. 서류 더미로
Don't judge everyone's bad luck by a pile of paper.
불행을
Don't make up your misfortunes like begging.
선심 쓰듯
Don't give with kindness,
봉사도
and don't force service or labor.
받기 위해 주는
Those who give in,
서로를
those who give in order to receive,
보이지 않은 데서
corrupt one another.
모르는 자의
Let us push the back of the unknown in the unseen places.
프롤레타리아트조차
Those who are unemployed and never even been the proletariat,
단결하라.
unite separately.
삽과
With shovels and pickaxes and singing and rice wine and dancing,
붓과 물감으로
with brushes.
행복 실험실
Run your happiness laboratory with chisels, hammers, brushes, and paints. Sooner or later, the new humanity will walk out of there, and they will truly
나오리라. 이상입니다.
live together. Thank you.
들렸을까요?
So, did you hear me well?
저 박수 소리 들리시나요?
Well, don't you hear the applause?
박수 소리 들리세요, 선생님?
Do you hear the applause?
박수 소리 들리시냐고요?
Do you hear the applause?
소리요. 감사합니다.
Thank you. Thank you for the big hand. Yes, there's quite a hand in this room.
나중에 토론해야 될지 모르니까
Well, we might have to have a discussion, so don't pick up the chilies, but stay online, please. Thank you very much, Ms. Kim.
시인이시고요.
She's a poet.
몇 군만 소개해드리도록 하겠습니다. 무화과는 없다.
So she published some poetry collections like There is no such thing as
Yeah.
fig, festival, let's go home, the fortune teller Hae-ja's house, happy land. She also published the oral narrative, I love you,
제가 생각해 보니까
and also an essay. Everyone I've met was
만난 게 아니라 김혜자 선생님을 만나면
maybe I think that it's not that she met someone who is strange, but after meeting
다음 네
Ms.
번
Kim, everyone becomes strange.
청해 듣도록
Maybe
하겠습니다.
not. Right, moving on to the fourth talk,
기본소득 인간존재를 키우는 원서적 토대라는 발표.
titled Basic Income, an Elemental Foundation, and Nurturing the Human Being. We have Mr. Myong-ho. Please welcome him with a big hand.
네, 문학평론가라는 호칭은 별로 적절치 않고요.
Well, nice to
자,
meet you.
정도로만
I'm not exactly a literary critic, but I am a literary researcher.
성의 문제라서
Recently, I took some interest in plant.
어떻게 시의 마음과 연결되고
So I am thinking about how the heart of
이런
plant
것들을 저 나름대로
connects
이렇게 연결
with the heart of basic income.
글을 마련했습니다.
And that is
저도 빠른 속도로
the theme of my writing.
하겠습니다.
Because of time constraint, I'm going to also read out
저는
my
요즘
paper.
고등학교 과학 시간에 배운 고대 그리스
These days, I think of the four basic element theory of ancient Greeks.
자들은 만물의
The philosophers of Greece
공기로 본 아낙시메네스,
include
물로 본
Thales, who believed that water is the source of everything. In Anaximenes,
불과 흙, 네
thought that air is the source, and Heraclitus thought of fire as a source, and Empedocles
인도의
combined all of that and established the theory that water, air,
제5원소
fire, and earth are what creates everything in the world.
모으는 존재.
And the Jainism of India believe that there is a fifth element, which is plants, on top of all these four basic elements. Now, plants are
원소는 그리스
the ones who put together all four elements and provide mineral and oxygen to the four elements, an adequate amount of sunlight, humidity.
할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
and humidity.
성격에 민감했던
Now, elements are called stoicheia in Greek, which means the basics or the foundation.
말하는 세계는
Now,
대적이지 않습니다.
Empedocles
원소들은
described elements as rhizomata proton.
사랑의 힘으로
Now,
연합해서
The world growing from this primitive roots is not static. Elements move and change repeatedly
동등하게
and
만문의 근원이자 지각
become one with the power of love and separated with the power of conflict.
그리고 중요한
Now, all four elements are all equally sources of everything and the sources of perception.
싹트고
Although there has been some debate about which one comes first, all Greek philosophers since Empedocles believe that there should be an adequate shares of these four elements for life to start, grow, and express itself.
불을 특권화하여 다른 원소들
However, the modern civilization
이로써 원소들 사이의 균형과 적정 비율은
subsumed all other elements with fire
잠조력을
on the top.
인정하면서도
In ancient Greece, fire was
반면에
respected, but they never forgot that fire has to be
문명 자체를
restrained to some extent. However, the modern civilization
화염의 문명
lost that control and let fire to become a wildfire out of control.
허무주의를 넘어서고자 했던 하이데거는
Now, Heidegger, who wanted to overcome the metaphysical nihilism of contemporary Western philosophy,
발견합니다.
found a clue of a new school of thought moving beyond a forgetfulness of being in the ancient Greek philosophy.
스스로 자라고
He discovered the concept of physis,
피시스는
which means
일이
nature,
아닙니다.
or material that grows and
자신을
changes
나타내는 존재
autonomously. Now, physis is not a dead
나타나지 않음을
material.
숨겨지
It is an event that manifests itself in a temporal and spatial
살아있는
limitation.
존재가 피시스라면
So,
인간
physis has the potential for growth in
생명
itself.
존재들과 더불어
In
내부의
that
자연과
sense,
외부의
human
자연
beings are part of physis.
생명의 원소적 토대를 이루는
Human beings
물과 공기와 땅,
have to live in harmony with other life forms,
인간으로서
not
자신의
separating
고유한
nature,
성장의
the internal nature, and the outside nature.
마다는 인간
Sharing
대지를 이렇게
sensory
표현하고
empathy
있습니다.
with sunlight, water, air, and earth that are elemental foundation of life.
인간적이라고 여겨지는
Now, Michael Marder, a plant philosopher of Spain, talked about the tasks of becoming a human. I quote, "Becoming a human
자기 자신
involves a process
이
of
제가 참
expressing
좋아하는 문장입니다.
oneself that is considered to be
인간
humane, and in that process, becoming oneself as a human being, as an individual being."
이렇게 번역할 수 있을 것 같습니다.
Now, similarly, Cicero described the work of philosophy
영혼을
supporting this challenge of becoming a human as cultura
오늘
nihil.
우리가 이야기하는
However, I don't think philosophy is the only one that cultivates our soul.
시작이라고 부를 수 있을
Today we are talking about the heart of poetry,
하는 일이라고
and I think the work of the heart of poetry is exactly cultivating our souls.
곁에서 다른
Now,
생명들과 더불어
poetry
잘
discovers
살아가는
life
약속을
within human soul and support human
면
beings to
비옥한 땅과
keep the promise of grow in harmony with other life forms. For plants to grow healthy, you need fertile earth, an adequate amount of sunlight, fresh air, and clean water. Likewise, for human soul to grow, you
인간 영혼이
need
더불어
to
존재하는
make sure
다른 모든 영혼들
there is a harmony between all souls,
함께
including the souls of plants and animals.
최선의 방식으로 자라게 하는 것입니다. 그때 우리들 각자는 자신의
And find the best way to grow. In that way, we can preserve our individuality and solitude and grow in an elemental
공동체라는
community of
전체주의적
sharing.
폐쇄로 기결되지 않는
That is when we will be able to create a community where we live, grow, and die,
하고 재생하는
and
공동체가
circulate and regenerate together. That is not reduced to totalitarian
물적
closeness.
자원이다.
I believe basic income can be defined as the material resources that supply elements necessary for the cultivation of human soul.
자라고 변화하고
Now, water, fire, earth, and
자신을 드러내고 키우기 위해
provide the basic elemental foundation for life forms on the ground to eat, sleep, breathe, grow, change, love, and mate, and express themselves.
제공됩니다.
They are supplied universally, unconditionally, and for free to all living beings.
현대
I
기본소득론자들의 주장
Here, free means freedom. One of the arguments that touched my heart the most among the modern advocates of basic income is that basic income provides the means and opportunity to realize real freedom for all. So I think basic income has a stronger
그리고
humanities appeal
인간으로서
compared to
자기 자신이 될 수
distribution.
있는
Also, basic income provides the elemental foundation for us to be ourselves, enabling freedoms and self-governing. When work is reduced to toil, we become slaves, not free
때
men.
우리는 존재의
When we are forced to
위축을 경험합니다.
choices,
위축된
we
존재는 자신을 방어하기
shrink
위해서
as the being.
원한과 시기심을 사회적 타자들에게 투사합니다.
And when we shrink as a being,
공격성이
the grudge and jealousy is projected to the others,
때로 이 앙심은
leading to even more grudge in a society. And sometimes this grudge is
굶주리거나
justified as fairness or equity.
그곳에서는 모든 이가
500 years ago, Thomas More
누구도
described
궁핍에 내몰리지
utopia as a city where no one suffers from hunger and no one is begging.
종사하지만
In his utopia, everybody has to work, but no one experiences deprivation.
시민들은
Except some clerics or researchers, all people
인간으로서의 기본
have to work 6 hours a day, but nobody is forced to only work like
쌓는데
slaves.
쓴다고.
Now, citizens
그곳에서 가장
share
큰 즐거움은
their labor equally, and in return, they are guaranteed of basic human needs and pleasure, and their leisure is spent on
오늘날 토마스
cultivating
모어의
their
유토피아는
virtue.
수많은 비판에 직면했지만
I think Cicero would have described this as the pleasure of cultivating souls.
쾌락을 보장받는
There have been many criticisms of Thomas More's utopia,
것이라고 생각합니다.
but I believe his imagination of cash transfer enabled
정도의 물질
basic needs and pleasure is still relevant today.
이야기됩니다.
People say that the modern
수많은
capitalism,
사람들이
for the first time in the history of
떠는 사회를
humankind, achieved the material prosperity
불안과 공포에서 흘러나오는 적대의 기운이
with which basic income can be provided to everyone.
낳고 있습니다.
However, we are still living in a society where many people live under fear and anxiety of survival. Today, progressives are losing the language of hope and
도덕적
future.
올바름을
Maybe it's because they think that talking about failure and frustration shows
진보주의자가 잃어버린
intellectual honesty and moral righteousness. I believe in order to move away from this defeatism, I think the progressives have to regain the language of progress, which would be basic income.
이묘 선생님의 발표
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee Myong-ho.
언어로 작용할 수 있지 않을까.
So basic income can work as the language of progressives that was lost. which
마지막
resonates with me a lot.
알겠습니다.
Let's move on to the last talk by Mr. Shin-Cheol.
이만하면이라는 중간사 김수영과 기본소득이란 부제가 붙었습니다. 일단 김수영이란 이름과 기본소득이란
He'll be talking about Kim Soo-Young and basic income.
기대가
So the name Kim Soo-Young and basic income will be both very interesting in his talk. Please welcome him with a big hand.
네, 신영철입니다.
Good afternoon, I'm Shin-Cheol.
류보 선생님이 전화를 주셨는데
Mr. Ryoo called me and told me that I can give a talk.
대해서 아직도 공부가 부족해서
He wanted me to give this talk on a basic income, but I told him that I don't know about a basic income very much, and I have a child who's less than a year old. So I'm very busy and I'm out of my mind, I told him. But now here I am.
왜 제안을 거절하는 게 세상에서
So it's the most difficult thing to turn down his offer because he always has a good cause.
그래서
I can't really running away from it.
뭐 도리 없이 저는 비평
So here I am, and I'm going to
김수영 씨 한 편을 가지고
share with you a poem
저는
by poet Kim Soo-Young.
시간이 주어져 있다는 걸 몰라가지고
I didn't know that I was given 10 minutes, so I thought that my script was too short, but maybe I need more than 10 minutes.
글이 있으신가요 지금?
So do you have the script or maybe not? So I don't know if this can be conveyed to you.
이 글은 기본소득을 말하기
Anyway, my script is seen as an introduction to a basic income.
어떤 서론
It's an issue that is hard to talk about, so we need, or to me at least, this is something that requires an introduction. The very moment when I brought up the term a basic income, the other guy mocked me, and he told me that it was an unrealistic idea, but he didn't mock me. What he mocked was a basic income,
생각을 하며
and he believes that I would join him in his ridicule.
저는 그를 실망시키고
I didn't want to disappoint him, so I had to find
우리 사이에
another topic.
믿음이 있을 뿐
In our society, we have trust, but I understood that we didn't have any shared truth.
김수영 씨 한 편을
So that is why I'm writing this article. I'm going to share with you one poem titled The Cancellation of a Divorce.
사후에
And this was presented and published after the death of the poet Kim Soo-Young. And this was not publicly or this was not actively discussed, even though the poet himself and his many other poems were. And I believe that this is related to the essence of the poet and also related to a basic income. It's a little bit tricky and hard, so I don't know if the message will convey very well. Anyway, let me read the poem.
나하고 별거를
I
하기
like your
이틀째 되는 날
decision.
당신은 나와의 이혼을
2 days after you decided to separate from me, you decided on our divorce, and you decided to pay back the debts that I guaranteed for my friend. And I like that.
이자로 10만 원
I had to prepare all the title deeds, and I had to pay interest of 6%,
줄까 3만 원
which is
하고 망설였지.
100,000. And I was wondering if I can give only just 50,000 or 30,000. And I wanted to make sure that I can get interest-free loans.
정식으로 돈을
And I didn't want to shed blood, so I tried to get some help from my rich friend. I tried this, I tried that. In order not to shed blood, or to shed blood a little bit easily or less, I tried basically everything, doing this.
그러다가 스코틀랜드의 에딘버러 대학교에
And then I got this letter from my young friend from the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, and I was impressed by the poem by Blake.
in its grave
Sooner murder an infant in its cradle than nurse an acted desire.
이것이 무슨 뜻인지 알았지.
I understood what it meant, but I couldn't complete it.
이것을 지금 완성했다.
Now, we did complete it, my darling. We won. We completed and finished the poem of Blake, and we can despise the cold now.
호텔 파티에 참석한 천사 같은 여류
An angelic lady writer at the government building of the National Assembly at the cocktail party. The pupils of this lady are a lie,
중립이
and that pupil was not shedding blood.
없다. 그대가 흘리는 피에
It's either evil or good. There's no neutrality in the God zone. Let's make up. And let me participate in the blood you shed. For that, let's cancel the divorce.
쓴 블레이크의 시를 나는 이렇게
So this is how I translated Blake's poem in Korean. And my interpretation is, when you see that someone is your enemy, then you can know that you're at the entrance of the good. And there's another footnote.
미망인이다.
The opponent in this case is the widow. I don't know if you can get the message clearly or right away. It's very difficult to understand. But anyway, if I can give you an explanation, it's like this. The speaker in this poem
미망인의 빚보증을 섰던 모양인데
acted as a debt guarantor for his friend's widow, and something went wrong, and he had to take all the debts. He wanted to carry out the good, but now it has become a matter of money.
줄여보려고 노력했으나
He wanted to reduce his responsibilities, but it didn't really work out.
거리는
So in order to avoid responsibility, he had this desire that he wanted to avoid responsibilities, and he found himself very dark and gross in trying to do this. And then, at the moment when the speaker received the letter from his young friend, I already
상태로 용
gave you the phrase, sooner murder an infant in its cradle than nurse unacted desire.
좀 의역을 하면
So what that means
욕망은
is,
아예 처음부터
well, the desire that is not going to be acted
으로 남을 가능성은
can be nipped in the bud
스스로 이해가 됩니다.
so that there is no possibility for remorse.
김수영은 돈을 아껴
Reading this phrase, Kim Soo-Young,
이것이 무슨 뜻인지 알았지. 그러나
did he give up on desire to save money?
하지 못했습니다.
He knew what it meant, but he didn't finish what he knew.
저는 이혼대로
But surprisingly, even though the wife wanted a divorce, she
공동 자산인
was
집을
okay
두고
to
내기로 하는
pay
어차피
the
지배는
debts
빚이라면
together
마땅히 갚아야 하며
with
결국에는
her
어떤
husband.
재산도 뒤따라서는 안 된다는 뜻입니다.
And these are the debts that they're willing to pay back. And there should be no shallow
흘리려 하는데
calculations. That's what the wife thought.
지금껏
So the speaker felt greatly ashamed because he wanted to avoid shedding the blood, whereas his wife was willing to do so.
어느새
So all these calculations
친구의 아내에 대한 원망과
led to the compassion
있습니다.
and the remorse and resentment and complaint.
자각이 화자를
And failure to kill this desire
그 지혜를 이해는
left him remorseful for the speaker.
것인데
So the speaker knew and understood the wisdom of Blake, but thanks to his wife,
우리는 이겼다.
he now can
이제 김수영은
complete the wisdom.
할수 있습니다.
So he says, "My darling, we won." And now Kim Soo-Young can criticize those who talk about the good, but those who do not implement this good. For example, a writer who has angelic eyes and those pupils do not shed blood.
일종의 도덕 철학적 명제를
And this experience begets moral philosophical proposition.
아닌 모든 것은 악이다.
Again, quoting from the poem, anything that's not good is evil. There's no neutrality in God's zone.
선의 입구에
The speaker wanted to do something good, but at the entrance of the good, he wanted to do something good
해진 선은
in the smallest way because he wanted to save money. And in this case,
김수영에 따르면
does a little bit of good
어떠한
make sense?
배신과 타협도 있어서는 안 되기 때문에
Or does it work? From Kim Soo-Young's point of view, this is just evil. There should be no calculations and negotiations.
있다고 볼 수 있지요.
So when he was asked,
본인에게 분개한 이론
when a writer was asked if there is freedom of speech in Korea, someone said, yes, to some degree, maybe this is good enough.
중간사는
And Kim Soo-young criticized with anger,
라는 말은
saying that to some degree, good enough, this is not something acceptable by Kim Soo-young.
적당히 타협하는 말
So this is sort of like a
맞는 말 같아요.
compromise, meeting halfway.
있느냐, 없느냐 둘 중 하나일
And when we talk about freedom of speech, it's either yes or no.
같은 논리를 변주하고
And in
이번에는
his
언론 자유가
poem, written 6 years after that, he also touched upon this point as well. And also regarding the
중립이라는 단어가 나왔습니다.
implementation of the
중간에
good,
있을 수가 없다.
to some degree, phrases like to some degree or good enough, this really doesn't work because it's
식이나 되는 걸까요?
evil. And why does it constitute evil?
순간 선의 대상
Good enough or good to some degree, in that case, then the subject would fall into self-affirmation, and that's a double mistake.
이만하면 이 없는
To
절대적인
some degree, this is
것은
not what we need, and we're talking about absolute good.
그러니까
This absolute good is very difficult in terms of individuals, but it's even more difficult in terms of
헌법이 보장하는
a society.
공유의 권리
So, in terms of public good, we have to talk about two different rights guaranteed by the Constitution:
신체의 자유,
civil political rights versus social economic rights.
시위와 결사의 자유
And we're talking about freedom of the body, conscience, and thought, speech, assembly, protests, and association.
대부분은 권리의 100%
These are civil rights. And going through the military rule, this is something we earned very hard, and there's no compromise, and this has an absolute position. But these are not enough, and we're gaining more perspective saying that these civil rights are not enough. We need more rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights.
의료 등의
And also we need rights to childcare, education, housing, and medical services. So encompassing these all, we have this concept of social rights.
규약의 이행 여부를
And Korea also joined this International Covenant on Social Rights in 1990s.
다릅니다. 다시 말해 절대적인 입장이 아닙니다.
But if you look at the perception of the Korean society, it's quite different from what the UN Committee on Social Rights talks about. According to Article 34 of the Korean Constitution, it does talk about social guarantee and how a country should do its best to promote social welfare. But
어째서 그런
there are not many cases where actual violations of social rights by the state is recognized.
아니라
Why?
정돼 있지 않았던 때를 기준으로 현재를 평가하는
Because the criteria doesn't come from the president, but it comes from the
이런
past.
태도는 다음과 같은 상투적인 발화를 낳습니다.
Then this attitude leads to a cliche. Many people would say that, how can everything be
이게
perfect?
나아졌잖아.
Well, this is good enough compared to what it was like before.
이것은 우리
This is
사람들에게 너무도 상식적으로
something we used to hear a lot. And you might think that there's nothing wrong with that.
대상은 언론 자유, 즉 자유권이었죠.
And what Kim Su영 was opposed when he was criticizing good enough or to some degree, this was about freedom of speech and civil rights.
라고 주장하면서
And also, he is arguing that we should be able to do that for the public good.
사는 도저히 있을 수 없다.
So the intermediary attitude, saying to some degree or good enough,
왜냐하면
this cannot be acceptable.
사회권을
But I don't think many Koreans in the contemporary era would agree because they believe that social rights are something
사회권에 대한 이 차별 대우를 어떻게
that are nice to have, but we can afford to live without them.
개인의 이동권 투쟁에 대한
So regarding the movement rights for the disabled people, I found some lead from this.
책인데요.
This is from a
그는
book.
이동권이 처음에는 사회권이라고 생각했고
And this person, Myong-ho,
이만하면
wrote that
호위된 채 살았습니다.
he was surrounded by many situations where people say this is good enough. And one day he realized this, and this is a quote from his book.
내려가는 길고 어두운 계단을 만나면
When I'm faced with dark, long stairs leading to the tube station,
장 나는 왜 이렇게
well, I was devastated and frustrated with my numb legs and wheelchair.
고 있는 듯 느껴졌다.
But from some point, I felt that these are grabbing my feet and my wheelchair. The very fact that I didn't have any disabled toilet when I attended this subway
계단 횡단보도
event, which was held by the district office, it felt like I was grabbed
적인 힘으로 나의
by public servants and the district office
내 몸과
and it
마음은
felt like they spread nails on the floor.
환경과 사람들의
And this
무관심에
exclusionary
공격당했다.
environment and the ignorance of people were attacking me, and
사회권에 대한
my
자각이 필요 없는
arms
위치에
and
있는
legs
사람은 사회권이
felt
뭘
like they were
의미하는지
tied to a
모르고
bed.
생각합니다.
So
그러나
when it
사회권의
comes to
온전한
social
보장을 지금
rights,
당장 요구해야 할 위치에 있는
many
사람에게
people would
그건
think that
없으면 안 되는
these are the
것입니다.
things that are nice to
그래도
have,
중요한 간극이 있습니다.
but for those
그걸
who
뛰어넘으려면
desperately need
이
them,
인용문과 같은
they
글을
can't
읽지
afford
않으면
to
안 될
lose
겁니다.
these rights.
이 글은
So I believe that in that respect,
그것이 절실히
the
필요한
quote I
사람들은
just gave you
사실상
means a
제도권에
lot
가깝다는 것을
because
정확하게 묘사하고
for
있는
them,
것입니다.
these social rights are actually,
이런 글은
in
인지적
essence,
공감을 위해
are very
필요합니다.
similar to civil
사람들은
rights.
나빠서가 아니라 몰라서
We need some cognitive resonance
공감을
because
선택하는 능력의 문제가
people
아니라
get things
공감적
wrong
능력의
not because
문제입니다.
they are bad,
자료를 읽고
but because
상상하고
they do
비로소
not
이해하는
know about
것입니다.
them.
그러다 보면
First, they
없으면 안
have to
되는
have their
자유권과
experience so that they
있으면
can have a
좋은
better understanding.
사회권이라는
So
포괄적
civil
구도를
rights
뛰어넘을 수 있게
that
될
we
것이고
must have
다음과 같은
and
명분에
social
이르게 될
rights that are
것입니다.
nice to have,
사회권은
well, these
그것이
are the
사회권으로서
false distinction that
보장되려면
we should
자유권으로
overcome. And
인식되어야
by
합니다.
having that
여기까지가
acknowledge,
서론이고
this
이제
is the
기본소득을
introduction.
말할
Well,
차례입니다.
maybe I can
기본소득은
move on to
사회권이
a basic
아니라
income. A basic
자유권의
income
문제라고 말입니다.
is about a civil right, not a social right. Thank you.
예, 기본소득이 이만하면 주어져서
Well, to some degree, good enough, well, a basic income is not something that can be
게 만들어야
good enough
수 있는 제도다.
and something that would be nice to have, but it should be within the,
없거든요.
well, I didn't really force him to give a talk, and I don't remember that at
나중에
all. But
돌진한 아이에게 제가
anyway, to his son, who is less than a year old, I might owe him an apology. Anyway, thank you very much. Our 5
있는
speakers.
것 같지는 않습니다.
Seems like we don't have much time.
에 대해서 궁금하신 점
If you
있으면
have any questions or comments, I think we have some time for comments and questions.
예, 그렇죠.
저는 경북 서울형 김삼식이라고 합니다.
Kim Samsik. I'm from
음,
the city of Gumi, Gyeongbuk province.
이라는 제목이 좀 이렇게 낯설었지만
Now, the title of the session itself, Literature and Basic Income, seemed quite unfamiliar to me, but after listening to your talk, now I understand
그런 게 아니라
it's a good match.
학창시 인문학 부분까지 확장해야지 않겠나 이런 생각을
And I think we need to expand the scope from literature to humanities.
상대화가 계속 18세기가 이루어졌지
You know, in the Western philosophy, objectification of subjects has been taking place for many centuries. And in contemporary philosophy, there have been
쓰이거든요.
many attempts to overcome that. One of that was by Levinas,
상대에서 뭐가 주체를 확인할 수 있다 얘기를 하시고
who said, you can become a subject or an
어떤
agent,
얘기죠, 사실.
not by yourself, but through the mirror of the others. You can apply this to politics or society.
또 반대로 자연을 대상화시키면 인간이 주체가 되고 자연이 대상화가 되기 때문에 결국은
When you
자연은 결국은
objectify
실제
nature,
결론적으로 뭐냐면
it cannot be a subject, it will be exploited, and we have climate crisis.
주체라고 생각한다면
I'm talking about this because if we understand everyone, those who have power, those who have not, are subjects, not objects. That is how basic income can be introduced. So if everyone becomes a subject, I think basic income will be granted.
마찬가지고 아까 처음에 발표하신
And this is what I felt from the poem of Kim Soo-Young and about the first talk about the others who are objectified. So I think in that sense, philosophy and literature can be one, and that is how we can have basic income earlier. This is not a question.
하여튼간
Well, listening to you, I was a bit concerned about how to give an answer to that.
한다는 걸 가르치고 있다 이런 말씀이시고
So I think basically he was saying that all disciplines of
보자 이런 말씀.
disciplines have to
하여간 오늘
be connected with basic income, and the terms in concepts should be harmonized.
기본소득에 관한
I hope you can contribute to the basic income movement by maybe writing a philosophical essay.
여긴 연구자분들이 많이 계시는데 전 연구자는 아니고
We have many researchers in this room, but I'm not a researcher myself. I'm one of the citizens.
그래서
And it was only recently that I came to know about a basic income. And 2 days ago, in order to apply a basic income to reality, we talked about the need to have a strong storytelling and how powerful storytelling can be. So I was very hopeful and I was excited to listen to this session. And
이런 얘기가
listening to the speakers today, it really touches my heart because I also feel that a basic income is what we need.
기본소득의 그 5가지
And while I study this, a basic income,
무조건
unconditional, periodic, individual,
현금으로 이
cash, these are the 5 elements, and we keep looking, we keep coming back to this point, and we shouldn't be vague and try to stick to these elements because
실험을 하고 있는데
we have many experiments going on across the globe, and without securing all these 5 elements,
기본소득이라고
these experiments are not actually a BI experiment. And even though they carried out experiments without these conditions met,
중요하구나.
we saw that that didn't lead to approval for a basic income. And when we convey this message with literature, through literature, can we really make that message clear? And don't you think that there's
시가 굉장히
some kind of resistance?
했을 때
So I was greatly touched by poet Kim
페이버틱하고 캐시 얘기는 언급이
Poet Kim's poem and about universal and cash payment. How can these be reflected in literature? And on a related note,
그 마지막 말씀하신 신혁 선생님 말씀대로
as Mr. Shin pointed out, it should be understood as a civil right.
그 아이디어로 이론이나 개념처럼 정한
So when it comes to a basic income, it
보니 이건
comes to me as a theory, but starting this topic, I understand that this is more of a
정한데
policy.
넘어가자니 항상 또 재원 얘기가
But when we actually move our attention to policy, then there's always this talk on money, funding, financial sources, and so on. So from
연결되어서
those who represent the literature, well, how can you really translate this idea into
하도록
literally so that it has some elements of literature?
좋은 질문 고맙습니다.
Thank you for the question. Great question. Who do you think will be the best person to address this question? Mr. Shin, maybe?
예. 하여튼 저희 오늘 이제 그런 생각을 저는 좀 해 보았는데요.
Well, listening
여기
to all the speakers,
문학이 문명사적으로 또는 인간의 어떤 윤리적인 측면
well, in terms of ethics
이
and civilization,
실현돼야 하는 방법이다라는 이야기.
well, this is something how we can introduce in terms of
생각을 했습니다. 그 이후로 넘어가서
literary perspective.
문학의 기본소득의 요소가 5가지이고
And the 5 elements of a BI
그것을 문학 작품 속에
how this can be realized and included in the storytelling of literature.
뭐랄까 그것은 어떤 문학의 오히려
Well, doing that might actually limit creativity of literature.
기본소득이 필요한 이유는 제각각
So the reason why we need a BI would differ depending on people.
제각각 그런 걸 풀어내는
So from different writers' perspectives, they might include this idea or the necessity in different
이 정책 이방가들에게는 그런 게
literary works of theirs.
정책 그런
So of course, even though these 5 elements are very crucial for policymakers, but it's their job to do that. And for us who are in this literary field,
때문에 문학 속
we can come up with our reasons
절실하고 의미 있다 이렇게 얘기하는
as
방법밖에
to why we need this basic income desperately, and we can use our language to do that.
이 정도 대답이면
So
되지 않나요?
does this address your question?
예. 저희가 이 2시 반부터인가요?
Right, from 2:30 there is another session in the same place. So this will be the last question.
이렇게 좋은 이야기들을 들을 수 있어서 너무
So
감사하고요.
thank you very much for sharing your precious stories. I have a question for Mr. Lee Myong-ho.
성에 대해서 관심을 가지고
Ms. Lee Myong-ho, about how you took interest in plant and how it connects to the heart of plant and also in basic income.
성장에 대해서 조금 설명을 해주시면
And if you can explain a little bit about the growth of plant, maybe I think we can have a deep understanding of climate crisis.
사유라는 책을 번역했습니다.
So I translated the book titled The Plant Thinking.
90년대, 2000년대 이렇게 문학 공부를 하면서 이제 페미니즘 공부를 많이.
So it started with my study on literature and feminism in the 1990s. And
굉장히
if you make an analogy of women to plant, it can be understood as a degrading way of describing women, neglecting the active aspect of women.
여성의 사유를 넘어서는 것이다라는 사유가 한동안 굉장히
And that was the orthodox thinking in feminism at that time.
제가
But I didn't
저는
quite agree to that perspective.
논의가 가는 거는
It's not the right way to understand gender difference. So that was what I thought.
식물에 대해서 우리가 굉장히
So having plant as passive and animal as active. And after some time, I realized that I had
활동성이 결여돼
a prejudice against plant as something
그로부터 점점 멀어지는
that cannot move
근데 이제 그렇지 않고
and that is not
식물을
active
사유하는
as opposed to animal.
흐름들을 접하게 되면서
And then I learned about some thoughts about new thoughts about plants
이 식물이
or plant thinking, like the title of the book I translated.
중에 하나겠죠. 도대 전부는 아니겠고.
And one of the thoughts I encountered was a philosophy that understands plants as one of the basic elements of the world.
연결돼 있구나라고 제 나름으로
And in that, I thought
이어지게 하게
the plant
했던 것
thinking
같아요. 그래서
is
첫
closely
출발은
related
사실은
to the ideas of
기본소득을
basic
한 것도
income.
아니고
So it didn't start with basic income.
일정한 정도의
It started
벗어나는
with
방식으로
my own
시작했던
attempts
것이
to move away from some stereotypical description and understanding of women and the discovery of plant thinking.
이것의 생각의 과정이었어요.
So that was my personal journey.
네.
제가 아까 선생님 질문하신 거 문 선생님이 저한테 답을 할래라고 물었을 때 제가 너무
When Mr. Ryoo asked me to answer the previous question, I was like,
저도
no, and I felt bad for that. So let me answer that question a little bit. I don't know very much about basic income,
큰
so
고민을 한다는 거라도 말씀.
when I'm asked questions like that, I am not in a position to answer that
그
actually.
얘기를 꺼내면은 한 세 단계 정도.
So that was why I was like, no.
첫 번째는 그걸 왜
But
저 사람들한테
let me
자격에 대한
make a few arguments of basic income. So the first question about basic income is, why do you just give it away to people who do nothing? Of course, you have a theoretical answer. There is common wealth that belongs to everyone. The second question is how are you going to pay for that? Of course, you have an answer.
총체적으로
So this is the existing social security system that can be rearranged to some extent to finance basic income, and then it doesn't cost a lot. But there is another
칭찬이 될 걸.
question.
결과에 대한 불신이 또 있더라고요.
It's about the distrust of the outcome of basic income. When you have basic income, the world is going to be turned upside down. And I felt that this is not about reason or theory. It's more about emotion
나는 그러지
or
않겠지만
belief. And underneath that, there is distrust of people. Maybe I can use basic income in a good way, but not other people
생각을
can.
했고
So I wanted to address that part.
기본소득을 설명하는 그 영역들이 많지만
There are many social, scientific, or economic
뭐 이런 것들에 대한
explanations about basic income. But when it comes to this emotional aspect or trust, literature does have a role. So I wanted to express my, sense of empathy with you.
있습니다. 예.
Right? We'll take the question.
안녕하세요. 기본소득 한국 네트워크.
Good afternoon. I'm with BRKN. My name is Hee. I love literature, but I don't know literature a lot.
전공자이고
I majored in social studies and social welfare,
나름 공부를 많이 했다.
and I believe that I did a fair amount of study when it comes to a BI. Listening to Mr. Shin, he talked about cognitive sympathy, and that really resonated with me.
하시는 분들 혹은 인문학 하시는
So
분들
for those
교류와 이런 장애
who
네트워크 차원에서
do literature,
비엔 대회 프로그램
well, in terms of networking, and also we're providing simultaneous
이유가
translation for this particular session because,
논쟁이나 이런 부분들을
well, of course,
등등이 해서 해야 된다고 얘기하시.
debates and discussions around the theory
근데
take place a lot.
이야기하고
And we do pay lots of attention to theory, but even though we have lots of these activities, they're never persuaded because they have strong conviction.
대중의 언어로
So maybe I thought we could turn to
좀 더 비유와
the eyes of the public and we can use some fancy words and metaphor
해야 되는데
to deliver this great message. And I'm not really good at that. I am good at threatening
할 수 있어도 이렇게
and being direct,
주신 분들처럼
but I'm not really good at putting them into beautiful words like you do. So this is not what a social scientist like myself can do.
운동에서 많은
So going forward in this field of a basic income, I look forward to your support. Thank you.
예, 앞으로도 계속 발표자.
Yes, we will. You'll have to keep coming back to this discussion sessions and so on. Well, we failed to give you good enough time, but anyway, I believe that this is not a one-off networking session, but it will be a start for our future collaboration. Thank you.